Well, it looks like all anyone can talk about in CrossFit at the moment is drugs. And that includes Dave Castro. Although not everyone that's spoken about PEDs has admitted to a cover-up. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm talking about Dave Castro's week in review of July 18th, where he started to speak a little bit about drug use within CrossFit. So what I've done is I've cut out a few clips. I have rearranged them slightly just so they fit into a couple of useful topics. Now, of course, that whole video is available on YouTube if you want to go and watch the entire thing. But what I've done is group them together into some relevant topics, and that means clipping out little bits where Dave maybe revisited a subject a little bit later. And we're just going to look at these three main points or main takeaways that I found from within the video. The first is who is actually getting tested at the games. The second is the accusations and then even a confession of cover-ups. And the third point is something he has changed his mind on that I thought was really interesting because it kind of contradicts something I said in my last video. So why don't we just start straight away with the first clip and look at who is getting tested at the games.
Now, big picture testing, games, 2008, no, actually 2009. 2009 was the first big year of testing, and we tested every individual athlete at the games. There was a sponsor who came on board, and they funded it, and we tested all the men and all the women. That was the first year we took testing seriously. Since then, we've ramped up the program, and I don't know if we've ever had another year where we tested every single athlete at the games in terms of the games field. That is something we should definitely strive towards accomplishing and getting to. We're not there yet. At the games, they test the podium winners. They test another group of people randomly selected, but the entire field isn't tested. The only time I can remember, I'm pretty sure we didn't do it after that, but the only time that stands out is 2009.
So 2009 is referred to as the great year of testing, and then it would appear that since then, we never had that same level of testing in the following 12 years. Now, we could reason, does it matter if, for example, this year, everyone who qualified for a semi-final was tested? Then surely they must be clean when they arrive at the games. Well, we've also got to think about the fact that while maybe the window between semi-finals and the games isn't huge, still maybe big enough for people to do stuff, the fact that it's been such a long period of time means we have also seen different ways in which people would have qualified for the games. So somebody who maybe got their ticket to the games through an early sanctional will have had a lot of time between receiving that ticket and actually having to use it. Now then, Dave did follow up with his feelings about testing the whole field.
So there's no, and I would love to catch anyone. I don't think like keeping a clean sport is a high priority. It was a high priority for me when I was running it, and it still is a high priority. We should test the entire field. Financially, I don't think it's in the cards right now. It's really expensive to do the testing, but that would be a great place to get with it.
So once again, it looks like money is the problem. It seems that Dave feels that yes, testing the whole field would be the best option. Yes, we probably would catch a few more people, but at the moment, it just looks like CrossFit don't have or don't want to use the money that it would take to pull that off. And I think to nicely highlight his point on why testing the whole field is really important, he uses the example of Gerard.
It's interesting. I think even when you look at what happened with Ricky, he was coming to the games as a rookie. Ricky was a rookie. He probably knew that we don't test every individual at the games, and maybe he didn't have such high expectations for himself at the games in terms of making it to the podium, and therefore not being worried about, call it, pushing the limits on the testing or on using prior to getting clean before the actual event.
That's interesting, right? So when Ricky was a rookie, and Dave really seemed to enjoy that, maybe he didn't think he was going to land on the podium, so he didn't think he was going to be tested. Now, of course, we know Ricky did make it to the podium, and therefore he was tested, and that all came out. But I'd like you to keep this point in mind, that there maybe are people going to the games knowing they're not going to be on the podium, and that could be a good thing, particularly when we start discussing the third point in the video. First, let's talk about some cover-ups, or maybe some fun accusations.
Someone said something to me on my channel where they posted in their story, and it just popped up in my feed or in my DMs, where they basically said, it's funny that now that Dave's out, we're busting all these people. So I did what I hardly ever do in those situations, is I engaged with the guy because it's such a ludicrous thing to say about me that I didn't, that now that I'm gone, all these athletes are getting busted. And what's funny about it too is I looked at the South America list, or some people from that semifinal. So all of these teams, or all these guys from that semifinal pop. And it's like, what, like these past few years, I've been protecting people I don't even know from South America. So that's ridiculous. Maybe you'd have an argument if some top guys that I'm really close with or know very well were popping, but that didn't happen.
So I've got to admit, I found that quite funny, as I think Dave did as well. Yeah, it's interesting that someone would say that, oh, now Dave's not there protecting people, suddenly we're seeing all these people test positive. And I think he made a good point. I would maybe update some of the references. So he mentions, Josh Bridges and Dan Bailey. But I would say this year, for example, if we'd seen Fikowski, Olsen, Vellner, ones like that, suddenly popping, well, then maybe this argument could have a degree of validity. But the fact is, as Dave highlighted, it's people from, South America or places like that, probably athletes he's never heard of. He's got no idea who they are. Why would he be protecting these athletes? What would be in it for him? But then here's a question. Would Dave ever protect anyone?
But the entire field isn't tested. The only time I can remember, I'm pretty sure we didn't do it after that, but the only time that stands out is 2009. At those games, that was early on, one guy failed the drug test, and this was all after the fact, and he popped for like a variety of things. And I regret this, but we did this at the time. It was we were small. It was a much different landscape. We told him he failed, and he basically asked us not to say anything because he was active duty and he was in the military at the time, and he didn't want to get in trouble. So we didn't say anything about it, and I don't know if we ever have since then. I am now, but so we kind of just kept it quiet, and then that didn't feel right. And after that, after that moment, we've always fully disclosed anyone who's ever failed going forward, and we've tested aggressively. And I've never covered up for anyone. I get accused of that all the time, that like our favorites we cover for. Actually, our favorites, Rich Froning, Dan Bailey, Josh Bridges, anyone who is big and doing well, we would test them more often. We would have them randomly tested we have an off-season testing program that the biggest names and those who you sometimes might think would be the ones to do it, their names are put into the testing protocol, and they were not failing.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that when I started watching the video. So what do we learn from this? Well, one, the idea of a cover-up is not insane because it has happened. Admittedly, it happened in 2009, and the landscape within CrossFit was very different to what we see now in 2022, for example. But it has happened. Now, Dave obviously talks about the fact that he felt terrible after doing this, and I guess the question we need to ask ourselves is, did he feel bad enough that it would stop him from ever doing it again? And then we can think about the reason. This wasn't to protect CrossFit's name or one of its famous athletes, but it seemed like it was to protect this person's career. Now, I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong. I'll let you decide. But I think it does give some extra context into why he may have made this decision. And I imagine things like where did this person actually finish in the games and things like that could have played a part in the decision that was made. Now we're talking about this person, and obviously there was a big part of me that was thinking, could I go and find out who this was? But I didn't, and I didn't even try, because when I thought about it for a few more seconds, I thought, you know what, this was 2009, and Dave made this decision for a reason. And it would make even less sense now for me to go and try and expose somebody as cheating at the 2009 CrossFit Games and the damage that could do to them for something that happened so long ago. They would have served multiple sanctions by now. And we don't know whether they even competed in CrossFit ever again or what sanctions were put on them, maybe under the table. So as much as I thought, yeah, it could be a nice boom for my YouTube channel, I thought better of it, and I haven't gone down that route. So we'll just leave the cover up as it is, but it did happen, and that is interesting. And, in the comments, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I'd ever heard of this before. But now let's jump into that third point, something that Dave actually changed his mind on.
I think my perspective has changed in one major thing regarding the testing. For years, I've said, hey, the money's not in the sport for the designer drugs or for the stuff that's really beyond our testing capabilities to be in the sport. I think I'm off on that one. I think there's money there, there's opportunity there, there's potential money for sure. And I think people do have access to some stuff that might take different levels of testing or more thorough or more, not thorough. Our testing is completely thorough, but elevating it essentially to the next level, because there's a lot of money in the sport, and there's a lot of potential to make a lot of money in the sport with even post sport when you get into doing your own thing, like selling programming, for example, or etc. So I do think there is the landscape has changed throughout the 15 years, and I hope there's not an epidemic of all these athletes juicing. And I don't think the top ones are, because we test them so often, but we just have to keep the testing pressure up and keep staying true to that program and making sure we keep them honest.
So I said in my last video that maybe the money is not there for athletes to be paying for designer drugs that won't show up on a test, or the people that they need to help them get around these tests. But Dave feels that maybe the money is there. And it's interesting that he points out it's not necessarily there for just landing on the podium, but it can be there for, selling your programming that's good enough to get you to the games. Not necessarily to win the games, but definitely to get you there. Or maybe you've got sponsors, endorsement deals with other companies. You're being at the games and getting to be seen there, and the increase that will have in followers and your presence on social media, that can be a massive revenue stream for people. So maybe it is worth paying your way around these tests to get there, even if it means you're not going to finish on the podium. Now, there's that double incentive. If we loop back to the first point, is if you know you're not going to get on the podium anyway, then there's probably a good chance you're not even going to get tested. So are you going to spend the money? So at this point, it's going to come to kind of maybe how much money somebody is making. But I just thought it was interesting that Dave has changed his mind on this. And actually, yeah, you know what? People are making decent money within CrossFit, maybe enough money so that CrossFit needs to elevate its level of testing to keep up. So yes, it's expensive to do more tests. It's expensive to do tests out of season. It would be expensive to test the entire field. But is that the next step that CrossFit must take? So I'm sorry to once again be speaking about steroids, PEDs, and drugs within CrossFit. I promise the next video will be a completely different topic. But thank you so much for sticking around and watching this one, and I hope to see you in a future video.